Behind me is the courtroom in the Pickens County Courthouse in Carrollton, Alabama, where, if he had lived, Henry Wells would have been tried for arson, for burning the courthouse that once stood on this site. But Henry Wells didn't live to have that trial. He became one of the most famous figures in Alabama folklore. The face in the courthouse window in Carrollton, Alabama. The finest, or one of the finest ghost stories in the state. Carrollton is an old town, aristocratic town. It had a nice courthouse here in the 1860s. But in 1865, General Croxton came through. Went on to burn the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa and sent some men back to Carrollton to burn the courthouse here for no good reason that anyone could figure. But they burned it. And the citizens here were incensed at that. And they determined at once to rebuild their courthouse on the same site. And they did. And it was finished about 1878, 77, along in there. And they were mighty proud of having built themselves a new courthouse. But one night, that new courthouse burned. And there was no doubt that it was arson. People who arrived early on the scene said that they found cans of kerosene around. And people began to say, Henry Wells burned that courthouse. Henry Wells did it. It's just the mean, ugly kind of thing he would do. Probably trying to destroy some of his records there. Henry Wells did have records of arrest. So the sheriff got a warrant for Henry Wells' arrest, charging him with arson. But Henry Wells heard about that and he left the country. He said, I've done lots of bad things, but I did not burn that courthouse, and I'm not going to be arrested for it because I'd never get a fair trial in Carrollton. And Henry Wells stayed gone for 2 years. And while he was gone, they built a new courthouse here, the present structure. And one night, I guess Henry Wells got homesick for his family, wanted to see his old grandmother and maybe apologize for all the bad things he had done. And he slipped back into town. He didn't think anyone would know he was here. But somebody saw him and reported to the sheriff, Henry Wells is back in town. And the sheriff dusted off that warrant he had for Henry's arrest on an arson charge. Went out to his grandmother's house, knocked on the door, and Henry Wells answered the door. And the sheriff said, Henry, I've got a warrant for your arrest, charged with burning the courthouse. And Henry said, but I didn't burn the courthouse, but you got me now. And I'll go with you, but I'll never get a fair trial here. And the sheriff said, oh, yes, you will. I'll see that you're given a fair trial. So he brought Henry Wells back and put him in jail first. And then he got uneasy about the safety of his prisoner because word was spreading all around Pickens County. They've got Henry Wells in jail. He's in Carrollton. He's in jail. And men were angry about what they thought Henry Wells had done. And they began to gather here in Carrollton. And the sheriff, thinking that they might come to the jail and take his prisoner, and remembering that he had promised Henry Wells a fair trial, slipped Henry Wells out of the jail and brought him over here to this courthouse and brought him up this curving stairway and into this room where there was a narrow little ladder, a narrow little stairway that went up to a garret room on top. And from that garret room, you could see all over Carrollton. It had windows on all four sides. And Henry Wells stood at that window, must have stood at all of them as he watched what was happening around him on the courthouse square. And the sheriff locked the door and put the key in his pocket and thought his prisoner was safe. But the word spread that, he's not in jail anymore, he's over there at the courthouse. And an angry mob gathered here. And they passed some jugs of whiskey around, and the mood got uglier and uglier, and somebody began to say, oh, no need to waste time on trying Henry Wells. We know he's guilty. Let's go get him. Well, Henry Wells, watching from that garret room, pressed his face against the window pane there and looked at those men whom he knew had come to take his life. And he screamed out at them, I'm innocent. And if you kill me, I will haunt you forever. And at that very instant, there came a sudden thunderstorm with heavy rain and brilliant flash of lightning. And the sheriff thought maybe the rain will cool the tempers of the men and they'll go home. But it didn't happen that way. They said, let's get him now. And they came storming into this courthouse and broke the door down and went up into the garret room, so the story goes, and dragged Henry Wells out and killed him brutally. And early the next morning, one of those men passing this courthouse looked up at that high garret window and he saw this face looking down at him. And he screamed out, it's Henry Wells. But it can't be, he's dead. And the man's screams brought other men, and they stood on the square there and looked up and saw this face looking at them. And the sheriff heard the commotion, and he came out, and he saw the face in the window. And he took a bucket of hot water and soap suds and a scrub brush and hurried up to that narrow room in the garret there and scrubbed as hard as he could scrub on that window pane trying to remove the image. But he couldn't get it off. And it was there the next day, the next week, the next month. It's been there since 1878. The face of Henry Wells looking down at that mob of men who had come to kill him, saying to them, I'm innocent. And if you kill me here, I will haunt you forever. And you visit this little town in Pickens County, you look up at that garret window, and you will see Henry Wells, the face in the courthouse window.